It was a fall morning, the frost not yet lifted off the low field, and I was 24 years old and 3 years married the day I heard the black buggy come slow up our lane. The council was 2 weeks off, and I knew the shape of that wheel sound the way you know a voice in the dark. My husband set down his coffee and went out to the barn without a word from anyone, because he knew that sound too. The bishop climbed our porch steps in his good black coat, and he asked me, gentle as you please, to close the door behind him. In the next room the baby lay sleeping, and I stood with my hand on the latch and listened to her breathe. The visit came twice a year, once in the spring and again in the fall, before we could take the bread and the cup, and it was never truly about the bread and the cup. I have carried the thing he asked me for a long while now. I am only now able to set it down. You have to understand how ordinary it all was first, because that is the part that is hard to explain to anyone raised outside it. In our Amish district, the church has no building of its own. The Jime meets in the homes, turn and turn about, the plain benches hauled from house to house in a gray wagon, and twice a year, in the weeks before communion, the ministers come round to every family to see that the whole Amish community is of one mind and at peace. They call it the Ordnungsgemeinde, the council before the cup, and no one may take the bread unless they can say, before God and the church, that they hold nothing against a brother and keep nothing back. I had grown up with it. I had watched my mother tie a fresh cap and set out coffee and a plate of Snitz pie the morning the bishop came, and I had thought nothing of it at all. What I did not know, that first spring after my wedding, was that the wife is asked apart. My husband was sent out to the barn, the same as ever, and the bishop sat across the kitchen table from me alone. He asked, was I at peace? He asked, did I hold anything against my husband, against the church, against God? And I answered the way I had been taught to answer since I left school after the 8th grade, quick and small and folded neat, a yes here and a no there, my hands still in my lap. I did not understand yet that the thing I was being asked to give up, sitting there in my new cap with the coffee going cold between us, was the idea that anything inside me was mine to keep. It did not feel like losing anything. It felt like being a good wife. My own mother had sat where I sat, and her mother before her, back and back, through more Novembers than anyone had ever kept the count of, and not one of them had named it either, so how was I to think a thing so ordinary could have a name at all? I did not have a word for it yet. The visits went on, spring and fall, and I began to notice that the questions did not stay the same. They narrowed. The first year it was only, are you at peace? And it was easy to say yes and mean the whole plain surface of it. But by the second year, the bishop had grown quieter and more careful, and the questions came in closer to the bone. Was I a peace to my husband, he would ask. Not was I at peace, but was I a peace to him, as though my whole worth were a still pond he could lean over and check his own face in. Did I keep back any thought from my husband? Had I read anything that was not given me to read, for we do not keep books of our own, only the Bible and the Ausbund and what the church hands down, and a woman with a page hidden in her apron is a woman with a door the church cannot open. And was I cheerful in my work? He would ask, near the end. For a discontented wife is a crack that runs the length of the whole vessel, and a district is only ever as sound as its quietest kitchen. I came to hear, underneath each plain question, the same question wearing a different apron. What have you got that is not yet ours? Though it was always asked so kindly, over coffee I had poured out myself, in the mouth of a man who had baptized half the district and buried the other half. And I learned the way you learn to card wool or turn a heel without watching your hands, to keep a tidy account of myself ready. Before every council I would go through my own days like a drawer being straightened, deciding in advance what was fit to lay on that table and what was not. I told myself this was only being prepared. I told myself every good wife did the same, and most of them did. But each little straightening took something out of the drawer and did not put it back, and I could not have told you then what all those small missing things added up to. They seemed like nothing, each one. That is how it works. It is never one large thing you are asked to hand over. It is 100 small ones, each so small that to make a fuss over any single one would only shame you. Then came the baby, and the spring council after her. I do not think anyone who has not done it can know how tired the body is in that first year, the milk and the broken nights, and the work of the house that does not pause for either. When the bishop's buggy came up the lane that spring, I had been awake since 3, and my whole self felt scraped down to the last thin layer. He sat across from me at the table, gentle as he always was, and went down the questions one by one, and I answered them one by one, the tidy account laid out the way I always laid it out. But at the last question, the one he saved for the end, the one I will come to, I stopped. Only for a breath. I was so tired that for one moment I could not remember which answer was the safe one and which was only true, and the two came apart in my hands, and I hesitated, and I saw him mark it. He said nothing, and wrote nothing down, but something moved behind his eyes, and then went still, the way a pond goes still after a stone drops through it, and I knew that my one held breath had been counted. If you have ever kept an account of yourself ready for someone else to inspect and felt the whole of it tremble on a single tired morning, stay with me a while. And if a piece of this is yours too, I hope you will say so in the comments, because it helps these quiet stories reach the other women sitting at their own kitchen tables tonight. Follow along, and I will tell you the rest of it. The fall visit stood out ahead of me all that summer like a fence post you cannot help but walk toward. I canned all through the heat, the beans, the tomatoes, the corn cut down off the cob, and I would stand over the steaming kettles with the jars ticking as they sealed and feel the dread of it settle in my chest, because I knew he had marked my hesitation, and I knew he would come back around to it. A woman can be at peace in every visible way, her wash white on the line and her floor swept, and her husband well fed, and still carry a small cold stone that no one else can see. I put up more that summer than I ever had, the cellar shelves filling row on row, peaches and beets and the chow-chow my mother taught me, every sealed jar a small proof that I was a busy and faithful wife with nothing at all to hide. But you cannot can a hesitation shut. You cannot seal a breath in glass and set it on a shelf and forget the morning you drew it. The dread kept its own cool cellar in me, and it never once needed a lid. There was a woman in our district named Ruth, the oldest widow among us, past 80, her hands gone to knots but her eyes still clear as creek water. She had buried a husband and 2 grown sons, and she had sat through more councils than anyone living. One afternoon near the end of summer, I walked the 1.5 miles to her little gross-dotty house, with a basket I did not really need to bring, and I sat with her at her table, and before I could stop myself, the whole thing came out of me, the tiredness, the hesitation, the marked breath, the dread of the fall. She did not tell me I was foolish. She did not tell me to pray harder. She let me talk myself all the way empty, and then she folded her knotted hands and looked at me a long moment. "Sit sta," she said, soft in the old tongue. "Sit sta, may kind. Sit here, my child." And she poured the coffee she always kept warm on the back of the stove. And she asked me one thing, quiet, that I would not truly understand until I was back at my own table with the door closed. But I will come to that. What I carried home from Ruth's house that day was only this, that I was tired of straightening the drawer, that come the fall council, when he asked me the last question, I would answer it plain and true for once, whatever it cost me. I had decided. The fall morning came, the one I began with, the frost on the low field, and the black buggy in the lane, and my husband gone to the barn, and the baby asleep in the next room, and my hand on the latch. The bishop sat down and asked me to close the door, and I closed it, and he went down through the questions in his gentle, unhurried way. Was I at peace? Was I a peace to my husband? Did I hold anything against a brother? And then he came to the last one, the one he had marked the spring before, the one this whole visit had always circled without ever landing on, and he leaned in the smallest bit and asked it, "Is there anything in your heart, child?" That is what he called me, child, though I was a wife and a mother. Is there anything in your heart that you have kept back from your husband and from God? And I sat there with the true answer I had promised Ruth I would give, and in the silence before I gave it, the whole meaning of the thing turned over in front of me at last. All those years I had thought the question was hunting for a sin, some hidden bitterness, some page in my apron, some man's name. It was not. It had never been about a hidden wrong at all. The question was only asking whether I kept anything of my own. Anything. A thought, a wish, a small private corner of myself the church had not been handed and could not enter. And to be at peace, to be fit for the bread and the cup, the wanted answer was to have nothing back, no inner room with the door pulled shut, not even one. And that was Ruth's one quiet thing, come home to me. Whose peace, child, she had asked me at her table, and whose peace, child, were you ever keeping? She told me she had answered that same last question the same clean way for 40 years, given herself over whole and kept nothing, and only now, an old widow with all her men in the ground, had she thought to wonder who all that keeping had ever been for. I do not know all of what my husband understood, because we are not a people who lay such things out in words. But I know this. When the buggy would go back down the lane after every council, he would come in from the barn and look at me a moment before he took off his hat. And I saw, that fall, what I had been too close to see before, that he had always known the visit weighed heavier on me than it ever weighed on him. The ministers did not sit him down alone and ask if he kept a room of his own shut away. They asked him about the fences and the crops, and whether he held a grudge against a neighbor over a line. They never once asked him to hand over the inside of himself, and he had known, all along, that it was asked of me and not of him, and he had never said a word, not to spare himself, I think, but because there was no word in our whole world for it, the same as there had been none for me. So I did a small thing, that winter, the smallest thing. I kept one thought back. Not a sin, not a secret worth confessing, only a plain thought that was mine, the particular way I saw the light come across the snow in the morning, that I told to no one and laid on no table. I held it like a warm stone in a cold pocket. And when the spring council came round again, and the bishop asked me if I was at peace, I said yes. I said, I am at peace. But I meant it for myself that time, for my own soul, and not for the district's ledger, and no one at that table could tell the difference, and that was the whole of my freedom. If you are a woman who has spent your life keeping a tidy account of yourself ready for someone else to inspect, I want you to hear the one thing it took me far too long to learn. You were always allowed a soul of your own, not a wicked one, not a hidden bitter one, just your own. A quiet inner room with the door pulled to, one thought the church and the world were never handed, is not a betrayal of your husband or your God. It may be the last true thing you have, and it was never theirs to take. I do not say any of this in bitterness, and I want to speak of my own people and of the Amish community I was raised in, with dignity, for they are good people, and this is their whole life the same as it is mine. I want to be plain about that, because it would be easy to hear the wrong thing in it. The bishop was not a cruel man. He was a man inside the same fences I was inside, asking the question that had been asked of him, keeping the account he had been taught to keep, weighed on that same cold scale once himself before ever he held it over me. The men who weigh us were weighed once, too. There is more sorrow in that than there is blame. For a long time, I had no way to name what was wrong, no word for the small, cold thing that all that straightening left behind. I have a word for it now. And if saying it plain, at last, helps one tired woman at one kitchen table understand that the door she keeps shut is allowed to be shut, then it was worth the saying. There is more of this than I could fit into the quiet of one morning, the whole of it, the years and the counsels and the things Ruth told me before she passed. I wrote it all down, just as it happened, in my own plain words. If you would like to read the rest of it, it is in the first pinned comment below. Sit with it when your house is quiet. And whatever they ask of you this season, may you keep one warm thing of your own, and may you be at peace, your own peace, enough to take the bread and the cup.